So thank you for the introduction, and thank you also for the invitation to join you in conversation today about this book. We're going to be talking on the reading number 17, Jesus in Samaria, from the book Good News. And the objectives and my intentions for this talk, dear friends, is to share with you highlights of this reading, very rich reading, to reflect on topics contained in this reading that are very relevant to us today, to invite you also to reflect on what it means for you. That would definitely be something that I would want for you. And so the way that I built the presentation is that I included some reflection questions throughout the conversation. So if you want to get paper and pen, you're welcome to do that. If you like to reflect that way, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if we will dedicate a long time to doing those reflections, but if there's a question that calls you, maybe you want to write it down and reflect on it later, you're certainly welcome to do that. I also built these slides in a way to highlight some of the passages within the reading, and I would love to have volunteers help me out with the reading. So if you would like to tell me in the chat that you would like to read, I will be happy to call you from the chat when those slides come up. There's probably opportunity for 7 or 8 volunteers. So feel free to tell me in the chat if you want to read. All right. And so, Jesus in Samaria. To give you, I'd like to start by giving you some context of what do we mean Jesus in Samaria, when did this happen, and where geographically this happened. So the reading tells us at the very beginning that Jesus had been walking in the area, and they started at the bottom red box that I'm showing here on the screen in Jerusalem. They had walked all the way up to Capernaum, and then they came down to Samaria. And so they are just arriving into Samaria. And as we hear more than once in the gospel, Jesus decides to rest a little bit, and his disciples go into town to go look for some food. And so Jesus sits down by the Jacob's well, and here comes this Samaritan woman, and Jesus asks her for a drink of water. And her first response to Jesus is, "But you are Jewish. How do you ask me such a favor, since I am a Samaritan woman?" She asked him in shock. And so we have heard about Samaria, right? We have heard about Samaritans, but let's put a little bit more of context. Like, why is she so shocked to Jesus's question? Milma, thank you so much for volunteering. Could you read this slide?
Okay. After the division of the 10 tribes, Samaria became the capital of the dissident, disagreeing kingdom of Israel. Destroyed and rebuilt various times under Roman rule, it became the administrative head of Samaria, I think, or one of the 4 divisions of Palestine. The Samaritans were almost constantly at war with the kings of Judah. Profound aversion, dating from the time of the separation, perpetuated between the 2 tribes, causing them to avoid any kind of reciprocal relations. In order to widen the schemes and to avoid going to Jerusalem for religious festivities, they built themselves a private temple and adopted some reforms. They only admitted the Pentateuch, which contained the laws of Moses, rejecting all other books to which these were annexed. And their sacred books were all written in ancient Hebrew characters. According to Orthodox Jews, they were heretics and consequently despised, excommunicated, and persecuted. The antagonism between the two nations was founded exclusively upon their religious divergencies, despite the fact that the origin of their belief was the same. They were the Protestants of their time. The Gospel According to Spiritism, Introduction 3, Historic Facts.
Thank you so much, Nilma. And so here we get some historical context for why was she so shocked that this Jewish man would talk to her. They didn't have good relations between where he was coming from and where she was. And you may even have to wonder, so why is Jesus even visiting Samaria, right? We see here that Samaria had been destroyed and rebuilt various times, and that speaks to me of chaos, right? When I hear this phrase, the visuals come to mind of these places in the Middle East where there's war right now, right? And we see those places destroyed. We know that they will be rebuilt in the future, but definitely a lot of suffering, a lot of chaos in those places, almost constantly at war. Profound aversion. You can only imagine maybe the hate, what may have happened. For some reason, I have images of people throwing rocks, right, attacking one another, fighting, and then they had also built themselves a private temple. Let's avoid them. And here is Jesus visiting Samaria. Very similar, perhaps, to our own relationship with Jesus. And sometimes when we may have built ourselves a wall around our heart, and still Jesus is here, coming to visit us, to bring the good news, to make an invitation to us. And so something else that also comes to mind is the separation of the tribes. How separated are we in the US, for example, right now, where there's a lot of antagonism, where we are forgetting that our origins are basically the same, right? And we may even be using names, just like saying they were the Protestants of their time. We may be using names to call someone else. And so I'd like to raise these personal reflection questions with you. And like I said at the beginning, feel free to take notes. Just any one of these questions ring a bell with you? Does it resonate with you? Who am I in disagreement with? What disagreements have I experienced recently? Where is there chaos in my life? Who do I feel separate from? Are our differences real? Who am I avoiding relationship with? What sources do I accept to learn from? Which sources do I decline to learn from or reject? Do I feel despised or persecuted by someone? Is it true? Or could it be a story that I have made up in my mind? And so it sounded to me like this topic of the separation among the tribes, it's something definitely that resonates with the current state of affairs in the U.S. And looking at the gospel according to Spiritism, the gospel mentions only by dint or power of mutual concessions and sacrifices can harmony be preserved. Concessions and sacrifices that we make for one another in order to preserve harmony. And so the question for us becomes, what concessions and sacrifices can I make in the spirit of contributing towards harmony? And here you can think at the societal level. You can think about your personal relationships. What concessions and sacrifices can you make? And so Jesus responds to the Samaritan woman's question. Have the Jews and the Samaritans perhaps such different needs? It is clear that you do not know the gifts of God. For if you had kept the commandments of God, you would understand that I can give you the living water. Whoa. Very clear words from Jesus. And something that comes to mind here is, wow, a few things that Jesus is putting here on the table. I think the first one that I want to address is, would I recognize Jesus if he was sitting next to a well that I go to? Would I recognize Jesus if he were speaking to me? Would I recognize his gifts? Or would I ask him, like the Samaritan woman did, like, you crazy? You talking to me? And then the second thing that Jesus is calling us to reflect is the similarity of our needs. The truth that goes beyond the divisions that sometimes we create on this planet, as so many times we create on this planet, that keep us from seeing, we're all coming from the same source. Are our needs that different? Not really. And so Jesus also talks about the gifts of God, and it led me to reflect and invite you to reflect. Do I know the gifts of God? And am I grateful for those gifts? He also tells the Samaritan woman, if you had kept the commandments of God, have I kept the commandments of God? Because see, this is a great opportunity of us, right? Looking and seeing ourselves in her. Would we recognize Jesus? Would we understand what is the living water? And as I was reflecting on this, my friends, I'll confess to you There were some days in which the living water, it sounded like, oh yeah, I know what he's talking about. Some other days, not as much. What is the living water? Where am I in relation to the living water? Am I in that place of being able to experience it? And so, on the question of would I recognize Jesus, I went looking in the gospel with the question, who does the gospel say Jesus is? I'm going to call on, I'm going to call on our second volunteer, Nora. Would you please read this slide for us? Thank you so much for volunteering.
Sure, my friend. All right. Christ the Consoler, the gentle yoke, the promised Consoler, instructions from the spirits. Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke unto you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 to 30. Item number 2. All suffering, such as miseries, deceptions, physical pain, and loss of loved ones, will find consolation from faith in the future and from confidence in God's justice, all of which Christ came to teach man. On the other hand, for those who expect nothing after this life or who simply doubt, afflictions will seem heavier to them as they do not have any hope of mitigating their bitterness. This is what prompted Jesus to say, "Come unto me, all who are fatigued, and I will give you rest." Meanwhile, the assistance and happiness promised to the afflicted depends on one condition, which is to be found in the law he taught. His yoke is the observance of his law, but the yoke is light and the law gentle, because it only imposes love and charity as its obligations.
Thank you so much. And so when I noticed this, my reaction was, wow, what an amazing way of being introduced to who Jesus is. And isn't this the same way in which he is introducing himself and talking to this Samaritan woman, being the consoler, offering the living water? And even when he was there, quote unquote, to rest by the well, and he is really offering rest, giving rest. And so I looked up a couple of words from this passage that Nora just read. Meek, humbly patient, gentle, and kind. And how beautiful to remember that this is Jesus's nature. Humbly patient, gentle, and kind. Humbly patient because we have taken our time to come to him, right? And still he's gentle and kind with us. And he talks about his yoke, a device for joining together. And most times this word is used in the context of this device for joining together, maybe animals who are breaking the ground for farming. But now removing that context of animals, think of the beauty of a device for joining us with Jesus. The yoke, that device, that's something that joins us with Jesus. And it's his love and charity as he requests from us. And he even tells us his burden is light. And so notice how also this second item here, it reminds us of having that faith in the future, how important it is. On the other hand, it reminds us, for those who do not have that faith in the future, in something after this life, or who harbor doubt, the afflictions will seem heavier, and they will not have a hope of mitigating their bitterness. And so this reminds us the joy that we can enjoy from having this faith in the future, from having this confidence in God's justice. And again, linking it with the living water, we're going to see in a few slides that Jesus talks about living water being relevant for the life after life that we learn about, that we believe in. Come unto me, all who are fatigued, and I will give you rest. In recent days, I have been hearing the phrase pandemic fatigue quite a bit. Come unto me, all who are fatigued, and I will give you rest. And so yet another reminder of the invitation that we have to love and charity. And so as a personal reflection, have I taken on my yoke of love and charity? What else can I do to expand my acceptance of my yoke? How can I keep growing in my love and charity? And so the Samaritan woman, she becomes curious. And she asks, so what is this living water? Master, I want to say, Señor in Spanish. Woman, the living water is that which quenches all thirst. It comes from the infinite love of God and sanctifies all living beings. And so as I read that, what comes up for me is, this living water, it's about experiencing the love of God. About realizing, wow, just how much God has given me, is giving me. And Daniel, as I was thinking those words, I thought of your birthday being today. A great date, a great reminder, right? To think of and reflect, looking at those things that God has given us and continues to bless us with. And of course, we don't have to wait until that one day of the year. And this living water, this love, it sanctifies us. And as I say that, it comes up for me that this love coming from God is the love that calls us to come study, calls us to come learn, right? Calls us to expand, to continue to evolve to the next stage, to the next level. Definitely a call of love being here. And love yourself for answering that call. And so, as I was reflecting on the living water, it occurred to me, throughout the gospel, throughout the Bible, we hear more than once metaphors with food, right? With water in this case. And I found this reading in Happy Life by Joanna De Angelis and Divaldo Franco that starts with a phrase that speaks to that. And I'm going to call on Agilson. Thank you for volunteering. Would you read this reading here from Happy Life for us?
Of course,
Please.
Carmen. Thank you. Lesson number 94. Jesus said, "Man does not live by bread alone, but also by God's word." Concerns relative to food, clothing, housing, and social interaction should not come at the expense of one's interest in the spiritual life. Set time aside daily to nourish yourself with God's word. Bread feeds the body, while faith upholds the soul. Bread strengthens matter, whereas faith dignifies life. Bread briefly satiates hunger, but faith fulfills our needs for good. Care for your body and nurture your soul so you may feel complete. Joana de Angelis.
Thank you, Agilson. And as I read that reading, it occurred to me, see the beauty of how the message has been crafted, has been put together in different ways. For whatever metaphor will be the one to connect better with each one of us, the one that will resonate on any given day. And at the end of the day, Jesus is encouraging us on the same message, right? He is encouraging the Samaritan woman to consider what is beyond her earthly needs. What is that water that could quench her thirst for eternity? And as I thought of that, the memory of the book Evolution in Two Worlds came to mind, as I know that Cardiac Radio studied that book in the last year and a half, I want to say, and or maybe 2 years. And we are reminded of how we are evolving on two planes, in two worlds, taking care of our earthly needs, helping progress humankind's work on Earth, hopefully saving the planet as one of those things, as well as taking care of our spirituality and progressing in the life after life plane. And so it's a beauty. It's a beauty, the complexity of evolving on two planes at the same time. It's a beauty having worries for earthly life and being called at the same time to not forget, to remember indeed to be very active in pursuing our spiritual life as well. And so the other thought also that comes to mind is that must speak to our capacity, right? That must speak to our capacity. We have the capacity of focusing on both at the same time, even as that may feel a little bit like overwhelming at times. And so I want to come back to provide you with more context about this fountain of Jacob, where this conversation takes place. It's interesting, this well is not specifically named in the Old Testament, but that is when it would have been built by Jacob. And there is mention in Genesis 29 of a well that he apparently built in the open country. And this was actually a place where they say that it's near where Jacob met his future wife, Rachel. The well is only mentioned once in the New Testament. And right now it is counted as a Christian holy site. And you can see a picture of it from the past here on the right-hand side. Now, Jesus goes on to make some comments about the fountain. And now I need some more volunteers. Can I have a volunteer to read this slide, please?
I can read it.
Thank you.
This fountain of Jacob will run dry one day. In the bed of the land where its clear waters lie now, the snake can build its nest. Do you not feel the truth of my claims before your everyday thirst? Despite the fact that you take a full pitcher from this well, you will soon return, thirsty again. However, those who drink from the living water will be eternally satiated. For those, there will no longer be material needs that must be renewed in every moment of life. Perennial comfort will refresh their hearts along the roughest roads under the burning sun of the deserts of the world.
Thank you, Miriam. And so this is Jesus speaking, explaining the fountain of Jacob to the Samaritan woman, telling her about how it will run dry one day. And he asks this question that I feel very interesting. Do you not feel the truth of my claims before your everyday thirst? When I hear this question, I get a sense of feeling it Do I feel the truth? Do I feel the truth of these claims like in my body? In my intuition? Do I see it? Do I feel that truth in my heart? And he goes on to contrast that and talk about the living water and how it will satiate eternally those who drink from it. That will no longer have material needs that require being renewed in every moment of life, that will enjoy perennial comfort even under the burning sun of the deserts of the world. And so this gives me a sense that this perennial comfort, that it is possible to enjoy in this plane, right? If it's possible for us to enjoy it under the burning sun of the deserts of the world, it is possible to enjoy this perennial comfort of knowing that even when we are going through tests, challenges, pruebas in Spanish, that we are supported, that we are comforted, that Jesus, the Consoler, is with us, walking along with us, that we are renewed. And so, some questions for personal reflection. I wonder, what is my relationship to my material needs? Do I feel anxiety around them? Do I feel trust? Can I be calm and serene, even during difficult times? How do I experience the spiritual support that I receive? Do I allow it? Do I welcome it? Do I let it change me, renew me? What does living water look like in my life experience? And it occurs to me that asking ourselves that last question, that there's a link between that and recognizing Jesus in our lives. And so as I was browsing through the gospel, it occurred to me that Jesus talking about living water, there's a link between that and his words, my kingdom is not of this world. If we keep finding links, we may end up noticing that Jesus's message may be simpler than we may take it for, right? I get the sense that he is telling us things in different words, and at the same time, it's easy to find the links between these different things that he is sharing with us. And so in that chapter number 2, there's talk about the future life. And can I have a volunteer to read this slide?
With these words, Jesus clearly refers to a future life, which he presents in all circumstances as the goal which humanity must reach and which should constitute man's greatest preoccupation here on earth. All of his maxims refer to his great principle. Indeed, without a future life, there will be no reason to have the majority of these moral precepts. This is why those who do not believe in the future life cannot understand or think the matter foolish, because they imagine that Jesus was only speaking of the present life. This doctrine can therefore be considered as the basis of Christ's teachings. Therefore, it has been placed as the first item in this work. It must be the point to be most closely looked at, as it is the only one that justifies the anomalies and irregularities of earthly life and also shows itself to be in accordance with the justice of God. Gospel according to Spiritism, Chapter 2, item number 2.
Thank you, Nora. And so something that is jumping at me from this paragraph is this third sentence here. Indeed, without a future life, there would be no reason to have the majority of these moral precepts. And also, the other item that tells us it has been placed early on as the first item in this work because that reflects the importance, the priority of this teaching. And so the reason that we are studying, the reason that the Samaritan woman meets with Jesus at the fountain, that she bumps into him at the fountain, is that there is a future life that we are preparing for, that we are studying for, and that it gives us even more reason and incentive and motivation for us to focus time on this, to put our efforts and dedicate our time to study, to learning more, to becoming better. And so, coming back to the conversation, the Samaritan woman tells Jesus, in a way, she must have been excited. She exclaimed, "Lord, give me this water." And Jesus says, "Then listen." And when I hear this, I remember also those times that Jesus went to his friend's house, and there were the two women. One of them was very busy in the kitchen and cleaning and preparing food and and the other one sits down and listens to Jesus. And Jesus says, she is doing right. She is the one who got her priorities right. Then listen. I get the sense that Jesus invites us and asks us to listen several times throughout the gospel. How are we listening? Are we listening with our full attention? And that's an interesting question to ask on this technology that has such a reputation for multitasking and distractions, etc. And so, also noticing Jesus's willingness to explain to us, to teach us, just like he was willing to explain to the Samaritan woman. He went into explaining what was necessary for that sacred emotion of divine love to illuminate her soul, sparing her from all the unpleasant circumstances of material existence. Yesterday, I watched a talk that Jusara gave to the Spiritist Society of Baltimore 7 years ago. And her talk was entitled The Spiritual Side of the Spiritist Center. Great talk. She discusses how spirits contribute to our meetings and their meetings too. And in the Q&A section after her talk, somebody raised a question about how can I be happier? How can I be happier in the midst of the challenges of life? And that question is coming to mind because, see, I think this here is providing an answer to that. Just being open and feeling that divine love. It can certainly carry us through so much and through everything, my friends. And so the Samaritan woman tells Jesus, I see so much confusion around me. I don't know how to worship God. She's talking about all those things, all those disagreements between Samaritans and Jewish people. And they had a lot of different rules, and they said, your worship is only going to count if you do it like this or you do it like that. And she says to Jesus, teach me the best way. And Jesus says, yes, you're right. Religious differences have generated much disunity. He understands the madness that we human beings create around religion, right? And then he says, but the Father is spirit, and he should only be worshipped in spirit, with our hearts, with our feelings, honest, sincere feelings, focused feelings. And the great news about that is that we have everything we need. We have the heart, we have the feelings, we have the conscience, we have the mind, we have everything we need to worship Father in spirit. And so the conversation between the Samaritan woman and Jesus is coming to an end. And Jesus's disciples who had gone away to look for some food, they come back. And they go, hey, Jesus, here, eat. And Jesus says, no worries, I am not hungry. I receive sustenance, and my sustenance is to do the will of the merciful and righteous Father who sent me to this world. My sustenance is doing his work. And I think these are such beautiful, beautiful words for us to reflect on, for us to be inspired by. And I get the sense that Jesus is role modeling it for us. I want my sustenance to be doing his work, right? And then after that, so a crowd gathers, and I'm going to tell you more about that in a moment. And the disciples, in another one of those occasions where the disciples interpret things incorrectly, the disciples, one of them says to Jesus, "You have had amazing success here among the Samaritans." And you know, so he's coming from a very earthly point of view. They are adoring you here, Jesus. And Jesus responds, "Well, I do not concern myself with immediate victories." Connecting it with what we said earlier about Jesus being meek, humbly patient, not concerned with immediate victories. And as I think about it, how often are we concerned with immediate victories? Oh, that person agreed with me. Right? Oh, the social media likes, etc. And so the crowd gathers. The Samaritan woman, she wanted her relatives to come listen to Jesus, and from that a crowd gathers around Jesus and the disciples. And Jesus tells the disciples, let's just listen. Let's just listen a little bit to the point you were making, disciple, that I just had an immediate victory. Let's just listen. Be quiet and listen to what the crowd is saying. And so they start listening, and the reading goes into detail about what people in the crowd were telling each other, the judgments that they were making about Jesus. And these words that I'm showing you here on the screen are a summary of what people were calling Jesus. When I read this, my thought was, oh wow, this gives clarity and makes transparent what the crowds were saying about Jesus. And I'm not sure that I had seen that in the Bible that I grew up reading. In the Bible that I grew up reading, it was a little bit of a surprise. What do you mean? Jesus got crucified just 7 days, 5 days after coming into the city triumphant on Palm Sunday. And when I read this, my thought was, oh, so now I have a little bit of a sense of what people were saying, actually, like in front of him, right? They gathered in front of him. They are sitting there as a crowd, I imagine them, and they are speaking all these judgments, all these negative words about him. And I think we read this phrase in both the Bible and the Gospel according to Spiritism. If Jesus had all these things said about him, what couldn't people say about us? It's a good reminder not to suffer, right? Not to suffer or be attached to what others might say of us. On the other hand, to be compassionate that they have those judgments about us. And to pray for all of us together, right? Pray for ourselves, for the truth that may be involved in what others say about us. Let's pray that I can get better, and let's pray for that other person to go in compassion and love. And so, with this slide, I will close this reflection here with you tonight. Jesus gives great advice. And when he says, the disciple of the gospel must only concern himself with the will of God, with his work under the watchful eye of the Father, and with the approval of his conscience. And as I prepared this slide, I felt like putting this bow, this golden bow, here on the bottom right of the slide, just because I felt like, wow, the message that he is leaving us with. Again, talking about priorities. What do we need to concern ourselves with? He tells us here clearly these three things. And I'm not going to say it's easy, right? There are some times that our attention, our focus will go to something else, to the pain perhaps of being criticized, to whatever is catching our attention. But what I encourage us all to do is to remember these words. The disciple of the gospel must only concern him or herself with what Jesus tells us here. So thank you, friends, for reflecting with me about this reading, Jesus in Samaria.
Thank you very much, Carmen. That was a great reflection.